The flashing lights painted our quiet street in colors of emergency. Red and blue strobed across the perfectly manicured lawns and the closed curtains of my neighbors' homes, turning our peaceful little world into a scene of chaos. 2 police cars and an ambulance were parked at odd angles in front of my house, their doors left wide open. From my living room window, I could see figures moving with urgent, jerky motions under the glare of the streetlights. They were all focused on one thing: my husband's car, a sleek silver sedan parked halfway onto the curb. Then, a sound ripped through the night. It was a scream, not a shout of surprise or a cry of pain from an accident, but a deep, guttural sound of pure agony and terror. It was a man's voice, a sound of something breaking inside of him, and it was followed by the high-pitched, hysterical sobs of a woman. The sound was so raw that it made the hair on my arms stand up. I saw Mrs. Gable from next door pull her robe tighter around herself, her hand covering her mouth in horror. Other neighbors were clustered on their porches, their faces illuminated in brief flashes of red and blue, whispering and pointing. They were all wondering what terrible thing could be happening on our safe, predictable street. I knew. I watched as 2 paramedics cautiously approached the car. They weren't rushing in. Their movements were hesitant, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. One of them shined a bright flashlight into the passenger side window, and I saw him recoil slightly, turning to say something to his partner. They couldn't seem to get the door open properly. The screaming from inside the car intensified, morphing into a desperate, horrifying plea for help that was muffled by the glass. My heart wasn't pounding with fear. It wasn't racing with panic. It was beating with a slow, cold, and steady rhythm, a heavy drum inside my chest. In my hand, I clutched a small, plastic tube. It was empty now. The industrial glue that had been inside it was no longer my problem. A police officer was now trying to talk to the people inside the car, his voice firm but laced with a clear sense of bewilderment. He couldn't understand what he was seeing. None of them could. They saw a man and a woman in a state of utter distress, trapped in some kind of bizarre, horrifying situation. They saw a problem that needed to be solved with tools and medical training. They were trying to save him. But they had no idea I was the one who did this. And they had no idea why. The day hadn't started with sirens and screams. It had started with sunshine and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. It had started like any other Tuesday. I woke up at 6:30 a.m., just as the first rays of light were filtering through our bedroom blinds. Leo, my husband, was still fast asleep beside me, his chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. For a moment, I just watched him. The man I had loved for 15 years, the father of my son. He looked so innocent in his sleep, so different from the tired, distant man he had become over the past few months. I slipped out of bed and went downstairs to start our morning routine. I made coffee just the way he liked it, strong, with a single spoonful of sugar. I packed a lunch for our 10-year-old son Thomas, making sure to cut the crusts off his sandwich, just as he preferred. When Leo finally came downstairs, dressed in his expensive suit and looking every bit the successful man he was, I handed him his coffee with a smile. "Morning, honey," he said, giving me a quick, distracted kiss on the cheek. His eyes were already on his phone, scrolling through emails. "It's going to be a long day. I'll probably have to work late again." "Okay, my love," I said, my smile feeling a little tight. "Just be safe." He nodded, finished his coffee in 2 large gulps, and was out the door. After I got Thomas on the school bus, the house fell into a familiar silence. I stood in the kitchen, looking at the small list of chores I had made for myself. That's when I glanced out the window and saw his car. It was covered in a thin layer of dust from the recent construction down the street, and I knew the inside was probably a mess of Thomas's snack wrappers and forgotten toys. A simple, loving thought crossed my mind. I'll surprise him. I'll give it a deep clean, inside and out. It'll be one less thing for him to worry about. He had been so stressed lately, so burdened by work. A clean car was a small thing, but it felt like an act of love, a way to show him that I cared, that I was still his partner in everything. I gathered my supplies: a bucket of soapy water, soft rags, a bottle of window cleaner, and our powerful handheld vacuum. I started with the outside, washing away the grime until the silver paint gleamed in the morning Sunday. Then, I opened the driver's side door to tackle the inside. As I expected, it was a collection of our family's life. A half-empty water bottle, a few stray French fries under the mat, and one of Thomas's little green army men wedged between the seats. I smiled as I picked it up. I worked my way across the car, vacuuming the carpets and wiping down the dashboard. The car began to look and smell new again. Finally, I got to the passenger side. I moved the seat all the way back to get to the carpet underneath. As I pushed the vacuum nozzle deep into the dark space under the seat, I heard a dull thud. The vacuum had hit something solid. Annoyed, I turned the machine off and reached down, my fingers searching in the darkness. They closed around a smooth, plastic tube. I pulled it out into the light, thinking it was probably a lost tube of chapstick or hand cream. But it wasn't. The plastic tube felt foreign in my hand. My first thought was that it was a travel-sized bottle of sunscreen, or maybe a fancy hand lotion Thomas had dropped. The car was always swallowing up little things like that. But as I pulled it out from the dusty darkness under the seat and into the bright morning sunlight, I knew it was neither of those things. It was a sleek, dark purple tube with elegant silver writing. I didn't recognize the brand, but it looked expensive, like something you would buy from a specialty store, not the local pharmacy. I turned it over in my hand, my heart giving a strange little flutter. The words on the label were clear and unmistakable. It was personal lubricant. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The air in my lungs seemed to disappear, and the cheerful sounds of the neighborhood, a dog barking in the distance, the gentle hum of a lawnmower faded into a dull roar. This wasn't ours. We had never used anything like this. Not in 15 years of marriage. It was a complete stranger in my life. An object that had no business being in my husband's car. I dropped it as if it had burned me. It landed on the clean car mat with a soft thud. My mind scrambled, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a joke from one of his friends? Leo had a few immature buddies from college who might think something like this was hilarious. Or maybe he found it somewhere and was planning to throw it away? The excuses felt flimsy and pathetic even as I formed them. Deep down, a cold, dark truth was beginning to settle in the pit of my stomach. This was not a joke. This was a secret. Suddenly, all the little things from the past few months began to click into place, like pieces of a puzzle I never knew I was solving. The late nights at the office, where he'd come home smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine. He'd always had an excuse. "Carol from accounting wears way too much of that stuff," he would say with a tired laugh. There were the phone calls he would take in the other room, his voice dropping to a low murmur if I walked in. The way he angled his phone screen away from me when a text message popped up. The growing distance between us and bed, where his touch had become more of a habit than a desire. I had told myself it was stress from work. I had told myself he was just tired. I was a good wife, I was supportive and understanding. I had made excuses for him because the alternative was unthinkable. Our life, our family, our perfect home on this quiet street, it was all built on a foundation of trust. And in my hand was the proof that the foundation was a lie. The pain was a physical thing, a sharp, twisting blade in my chest. I felt my vision blur, but the tears didn't come. The shock was too great, too profound. It was quickly being replaced by something else, something colder and harder. It was the sharp, bitter sting of betrayal. He hadn't just cheated, he had made me a fool. I was at home, taking care of our son, cleaning his car as a loving surprise, while he was out there living a completely different life with someone else. My hands began to shake, not with sadness, but with a slow burning rage. I picked the tube up again, the plastic feeling slick and vile in my hand. This little object was the symbol of it all. The lies, the secrets, the disrespect. I slowly finished my work, but the loving spirit was gone. My movements were robotic, efficient. I wiped down the last of the surfaces and vacuumed the final patch of carpet. I placed the tube back under the seat, tucking it deep into the darkness where I had found it. For now, it would remain his secret. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions of a normal life. I picked Thomas up from school, helped him with his homework, and started making dinner. But all the while, a storm was raging inside me. When I heard Leo's car pull into the driveway, my heart hardened into a small, cold stone in my chest. He walked in, looking tired but smiling. "Hey, honey," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. His lips were cool and dry. "Smells great in here." "I'm making your favorite," I said, my voice sounding strangely calm, even to my own ears. "You're the best," he sighed, dropping his briefcase by the door. "Just a boring day at the office. Endless meetings." The lie was so easy for him. It rolled off his tongue without a second thought. He looked at me, but he didn't really see me. He didn't see the storm in my eyes or the tremor in my hands. He saw the woman who made his favorite dinner, the woman who believed his every word. In that moment, watching him lie so effortlessly to my face, the last bit of my sadness withered and died. It was replaced by a cold, clear purpose. He would not get away with this. He would not be the one to destroy our family and walk away with a smile. I would not be the crying, helpless wife. Later that night, after he had fallen asleep, I slipped out of our bed. I didn't go to the living room to cry, or to the kitchen for a glass of water. I walked, silently, to the garage. The air was cool and smelled of gasoline and sawdust. I flicked on the single overhead light, and my eyes scanned the shelves, the organized chaos of Leo's workspace. My gaze landed on a tube sitting on his workbench, next to a shattered ceramic vase he had been meaning to fix for weeks. The label was bold and red. Industrial strength superglue. Warning, bonds instantly. I picked it up. It was about the same size as the other tube. I looked from the glue in my hand toward the closed door leading back into my house, where my husband slept peacefully, dreaming his secret dreams. And right there, under the buzz of the fluorescent light, a quiet, terrible plan began to form in my mind. The house was a tomb of silence, broken only by the soft, rhythmic sound of Leo's breathing beside me in the dark. It was a sound that had once brought me comfort, a steady anchor in the night. Now, it was the sound of a stranger, a man whose secrets were a poison seeping into the life we had built. I lay perfectly still, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as shadows danced across it. I waited for his breathing to deepen, for the occasional soft snore that signaled he was truly lost to the world. It felt like an eternity, but finally, it came. That was my signal. Slipping out from under the covers was the first step on a journey from which there was no return. My bare feet were silent on the plush bedroom carpet. I moved with a practiced grace that mothers learn, an ability to navigate a dark house without making a single sound that might wake a sleeping child, or in this case, a sleeping husband. Every creak of the old house was a potential betrayal. Every shift of the floorboards, a threat. I held my breath as I passed Thomas's room, his door slightly ajar. A wave of guilt washed over me, so sharp and cold it almost made me stop. What would he think of his mother if he knew? But the thought of Leo, of the purple tube, of the easy lie he told me at dinner, hardened my resolve. This wasn't just for me. It was for the sanctity of the home he had defiled. I reached the garage door and turned the knob with excruciating slowness, wincing at the soft click of the latch. The air in the garage was cool and smelled of motor oil and cut grass. I didn't turn on the main overhead lights. They were too loud, too revealing. Instead, I flicked on the small, focused lamp on Leo's workbench. It cast a pool of stark white light onto the scarred wooden surface, creating an island of purpose in the surrounding darkness. It felt like a stage, and I was the only actor in this silent, grim play. My tools were waiting. The purple tube, which I had retrieved from his car an hour earlier. The tube of industrial glue. An old, empty jam jar. A roll of paper towels. And a pair of thin rubber gloves. First, I had to empty the evidence. I unscrewed the silver cap from the lubricant and held the tube over the jam jar. I squeezed, and a thick, clear gel oozed out. It was slick and odorless, a substance designed for intimacy and pleasure. Seeing it now, knowing its true context, filled me with a sickening revulsion. I squeezed until every last drop was out, my knuckles white with the effort. Then, I took the empty tube to the utility sink in the corner. I used hot water and strong dish soap, scrubbing the inside with a bottle brush until it was sterile and clean. I had to remove every trace of the lubricant. The glue would not bond to a greasy surface. My actions were methodical, precise. I was no longer a heartbroken wife. I was a chemist, a technician preparing for a delicate and dangerous experiment. I dried the tube carefully, inside and out, until it was perfectly clean and bone dry. Now came the most critical part. I pulled on the rubber gloves. They snapped crisply against my wrists, a sound that sealed my commitment. I picked up the tube of industrial glue. The red warning label seemed to scream at me in the quiet garage. Bonds instantly. Avoid contact with skin. I took a deep breath. The glue was thick, a murky gray color, and smelled sharply of chemicals. It was the complete opposite of the clear, innocent gel it was replacing. With a steady hand, I carefully positioned the nozzle of the glue tube into the opening of the purple tube. I began to squeeze. It was a slow, painstaking process. I had to fill the tube enough so that it would feel normal, so it wouldn't feel suspiciously light. But I couldn't overfill it. A single drop of this stuff on the outside would ruin everything. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic counterpoint to my calm, deliberate movements. The garage was silent except for the faint, sticky sound of the glue being transferred from one prison to another. Finally, it was done. The purple tube felt right in my hand, its weight familiar, its appearance perfect. I meticulously wiped the nozzle with a paper towel before screwing the silver cap back on. It looked exactly as it had when I first found it, an innocent object of betrayal. But now, it was a weapon. My weapon. The final act was returning it to its hiding place. I crept back through the house, the transformed tube clutched in my hand. Opening the car door in the dead of night felt like breaking into my own life. I reached under the passenger seat, my fingers finding the familiar spot, and tucked the tube deep into the darkness. It was back where it belonged, a perfectly set trap. I returned to my bedroom and slipped back under the covers. Leo hadn't moved. He was still breathing that same, steady rhythm. The man lying next to me was a complete stranger, a target. I watched the rise and fall of his chest in the dim light, and I felt nothing. The wife who had loved him, who would have cried for him, was gone. In her place was a hunter, patient and cold, lying in the darkness, waiting for her prey to walk straight into the trap she had so carefully prepared. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he would. The morning after was a masterclass in deception, and I was the star performer. I woke up before Leo. The cold purpose from the night before still settled deep within me. It wasn't a fleeting rage, it was a permanent part of my landscape now, a frozen lake inside my chest. I went through the motions of our morning routine with a chilling precision. I made coffee that smelled of home and happiness. I buttered toast and set it on his plate next to the newspaper. I smiled. When Leo came downstairs, yawning and stretching, I greeted him with a kiss on the cheek. "Good morning, sleepyhead," I chirped, my voice a perfect imitation of the loving wife I used to be. "Morning," he mumbled, running a hand through his messy hair. He looked at me, his eyes still clouded with sleep, and saw nothing out of the ordinary. He saw his wife, his home, his comfortable life, all exactly as he had left it. He had no idea that he was a soldier walking through a minefield, and I was the one who had buried the mines. We sat at the kitchen table, a picture of domestic bliss. Thomas chattered on about a video game, and Leo nodded along, sipping his coffee. I watched him over the rim of my own cup. Every casual gesture, every easy smile he gave our son, was a fresh betrayal. He was an actor, playing the part of a devoted family man, and he was very, very good at it. But I was learning to be a better one. I was playing the part of the oblivious, trusting wife, and my performance was flawless. The moment of truth arrived mid-morning, just as he was gathering his things to leave for work. His phone, which was sitting on the kitchen counter, let out a soft times ping asterisk. It wasn't a loud noise, but in the tense silence of my mind, it sounded like a starting gun. Leo's eyes flickered to the screen. I saw it all in a fraction of a second. The way his body tensed, the quick, almost imperceptible smile that touched the corner of his lips before he suppressed it, the way he casually picked up the phone and angled it away from me. He tapped out a quick reply, his thumb moving with practiced speed. He cleared his throat and straightened his tie, not quite meeting my eyes. "Hey, honey," he began, his voice taking on that familiar, slightly apologetic tone. "Looks like it's going to be another one of those days. I'll have to work late to get the Peterson proposal finished." He paused, then added the flourish. "I'll probably just hit the gym on the way home after. Don't wait up for me." It was the same script he had used a dozen times before. The lie was so worn, so familiar, it was almost comfortable. A part of the old me, the weak me, wanted to scream. Asterisk. I know you're lying. Just tell me the truth. Asterisk. But the new me simply smiled. A calm, understanding smile. Of course, my love. Don't work too hard. I'll save you some dinner. You're the best, Anna, he said, giving me a quick, passionless kiss. And then, he was gone. The moment the front door clicked shut, the smile fell from my face. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a surge of adrenaline so powerful it made my vision sharp and my hearing acute. The waiting was over. The hunt had begun. I didn't rush. I washed the breakfast dishes, my movements calm and deliberate. I called my mother to check in, my voice even and cheerful. Then, I went to my closet and put on a plain gray sweatshirt and a baseball cap. I became invisible. I grabbed my car keys and slipped out the back door. Following him was surprisingly easy. He drove with the casual confidence of a man who believed he was completely safe, completely unaccountable. I stayed 3 cars behind him, a gray ghost in his rearview mirror. My heart pounded a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Each turn of his wheels was a turn of the screw, tightening the tension inside me. He didn't take the highway towards his downtown office. He took the old river road, the one that led away from the city. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. This was it. The lie was unraveling right in front of me. He finally turned onto a quiet side street that led to a small, secluded park, a pretty respectable place with a duck pond and a playground. It was the perfect spot. Public enough to seem innocent, but quiet enough for privacy. He pulled his silver sedan into a parking spot under a large oak tree and shut off the engine. He was waiting. I parked my own car further down the street, partially hidden behind a thicket of overgrown bushes. I had a clear view, and I waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. My mind was a whirlwind of terrible possibilities. Who was she? A coworker? A stranger from a bar? Then, another car turned onto the street. A familiar dark blue SUV. The kind of car you see in every driveway on our street. The kind of car parked 2 houses down from ours. My blood ran cold. Asterisk. No. It can't be. Asterisk. The SUV parked a few spots away from Leo's car. The driver's side door opened and a woman got out. My world, which had already been cracked, shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. It was Claire, my neighbor, the woman who brought me soup when I had the flu, the woman whose son was Thomas's best friend, the woman I had coffee with on her porch just last week, complaining about our husbands working too late. She looked over her shoulder, a quick, nervous glance, before hurrying towards Leo's car. She pulled open the passenger door and slid inside. I sat there, frozen, behind the wheel of my car. The betrayal was so complete, so profound, it stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't just my husband. It was my friend, my neighbor, my confidant. My entire world was a lie. I watched the car's windows begin to fog in the cool afternoon air. I sat there, hidden in the trees. A judge who had already passed sentence, now just waiting for it to be carried out. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. And now, all I had to do was wait for it to spring. The world outside my car continued its peaceful suburban rhythm. A woman jogged past with a stroller. A golden retriever chased a frisbee on the far side of the park, and the ducks on the pond floated lazily in the afternoon sunday. It was a scene of perfect tranquility, a stark, sickening contrast to the storm raging inside me, and the horror that was about to unfold in the silver sedan parked under the oak tree. I stared at the car, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. The windows were now completely fogged over, a misty veil hiding the betrayal taking place inside. My car, my husband, my neighbor. The intimacy of it all was a fresh stab of pain. They were right there, just 100 feet away, destroying my life in broad daylight. Minutes crawled by, each one stretching into an agonizing hour. A part of me, a small, terrified voice from the woman I used to be, screamed at me to just drive away. To go home, pack a bag for myself and Thomas, and disappear. Let them have their sordid affair. Let them deal with the consequences of their own actions. The thought of what was coming, of what I had set in motion, was a heavy, suffocating weight. This was no longer just about exposing a cheater. This was a point of no return. My hands were on the ignition key, ready to turn it, ready to flee. But I was frozen in place, paralyzed by a morbid curiosity and a cold, unyielding need to see it through. I had to watch the trap spring. I had to witness the moment their secret world came crashing down around them. I had earned this. My pain had paid for this front row seat. Then, it began. It started not with a scream, but with a muffled shout. A single sharp exclamation from inside the car. A sound of surprise and confusion. I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat. Another shout followed, louder this time, tinged with a note of panic. It was Leo's voice. I could hear it even through the closed windows. Then came a woman's shriek. It wasn't a sound of passion. It was a high, thin wail of pure alarm. Claire. My body went rigid. The sounds from the car grew more chaotic. A confusing jumble of panicked voices and thudding sounds. As if they were struggling against something. The car rocked slightly on its suspension. Suddenly, the passenger side door was thrown open with violent force. But no one got out. Instead, I saw a tangle of limbs. Claire was trying to scramble out of the car, her face a mask of terror and confusion. Leo was trying to pull her back, or maybe he was trying to push himself away, I couldn't tell. Their movements were clumsy, unnatural, and horrifically connected. They were stuck together. The initial confusion in their voices morphed into raw, unfiltered terror. The sounds were clearer now, spilling out of the open car door and echoing across the quiet park. What is this? What's happening? Claire's voice was hysterical, broken by panicked sobs. Leo, I can't move. Get it off. I'm trying. Leo's voice was no longer the smooth, confident tone of the man I knew. It was a ragged, guttural cry, strained with agony. It's burning! Oh God, it's burning! That's when the screaming truly started. It was a duet of horror and pain that sliced through the peaceful afternoon air. The jogger with the stroller stopped dead in her tracks, her hand flying to her mouth. The man with the dog stood up, shielding his eyes as he stared at the commotion. This was no longer a private affair. It was a public spectacle of the most grotesque kind. They tumbled out of the car in a clumsy, horrifying heap, landing on the grass verge. They were fused together in a way that defied nature, a monstrous sculpture of betrayal. Their clothes were in disarray, their bodies twisted at an impossible angle. It was so much worse than I had imagined. The industrial glue wasn't just a powerful adhesive. The label had warned of a chemical reaction, a rapid heating process as it cured. It was bonding them together with pain and heat. Leo's screams were the worst. They were the sounds of a man being skinned alive. A primal, animalistic howl of pure, unadulterated agony that seemed to go on and on without end. He was clawing at his own skin, at Claire, trying to tear himself free, but he was only making it worse. People were starting to emerge from their houses now, drawn by the terrible, inhuman sounds. Phones were coming out, pointing, and recording. The scene was no longer just a private tragedy. It was becoming a viral video, in real time. I watched, my heart, a block of ice in my chest, as the first person dialed 911. My plan had worked. It had worked with a devastating, horrific efficiency that I could never have predicted. I had wanted to expose him, to shame him. But this was something else entirely. This was a public crucifixion. And as the distant wail of a siren began to grow louder, I knew my quiet, suburban life was over forever. The siren's wail grew from a distant cry to an ear-splitting shriek as the first ambulance rounded the corner, its lights bathing the horrific scene in relentless flashes of red. The neighborhood had become a frozen tableau of gawking faces, a silent audience to a play they could never have imagined. Phone screens glowed in the twilight, a constellation of tiny, morbid witnesses, each one recording, broadcasting, and immortalizing my husband's and my neighbor's utter humiliation. A terrible, cold satisfaction warred with a rising tide of horror inside me. I had wanted to expose them. I had wanted them to feel a fraction of the shame they had inflicted on me. But watching them writhing on the grass, their screams of agony now dissolving into pathetic, pain-filled whimpers, felt like watching a monster of my own creation come to life. This was so much more than shame. This was a public undoing. Paramedics swarmed the scene first, their professional masks of calm faltering for a split second as they took in the bizarre, grotesque reality of the situation. I saw one of them kneel down, assess the scene, and immediately stand up, speaking urgently into his radio. This wasn't a standard medical emergency. This was something else entirely. Minutes later, a fire truck arrived, its sheer size adding to the surreal spectacle. Firefighters in heavy gear disembarked, carrying not hoses and axes, but a specialized kit. They erected a temporary portable privacy screen around Leo and Claire, using large white sheets to shield them from the dozens of prying eyes and recording phones. But the barrier couldn't contain the sounds, the clipped, tense voices of the emergency crew, the muffled sobs of Claire, and the low, agonized groans of Leo. It was a slow, meticulous, and deeply humiliating process. I watched as they worked for what felt like an eternity. A public surgery performed on the operating table of our neighborhood lawn. They had to cut away clothing with shears, the snipping sound sharp and final in the tense air. They used chemical solvents, the acrid smell drifting on the breeze, to painstakingly dissolve the industrial-strength bond I had created. Each minute that passed was another minute of their absolute degradation, played out for the entire world to see. Finally, they were separated. They were loaded onto 2 separate gurneys, their bodies mercifully covered by white sheets, obscuring everything but the shame that radiated from them like heat. As the paramedics prepared to load Claire into the first ambulance, a new figure burst onto the scene, running from 2 houses down. It was Robert, Claire's husband. He was a quiet man, always in his wife's shadow. I barely knew him beyond a polite nod when he was mowing his lawn. He ran with a frantic energy, his face pale with panic. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the betrayed husband, here to confront the wreckage of his marriage. I braced myself for a scene of rage, of accusation shouted across the lawn. But Robert didn't do what I expected. He stopped short at the edge of the chaos, his chest heaving. His eyes darted around, taking in the flashing lights, the firefighters, the gurney carrying his wife. But his gaze didn't linger on her. It swept past the scene, scanning the crowd of neighbors, the houses, the street. He looked like a man searching for an answer, not a man reacting to a problem. And then, his eyes found me. Or, rather, they found my car, parked and half hidden in the shadows down the street. His gaze locked onto it for a long, pregnant moment. Then, his eyes lifted, tracing a line from my car directly to the front of my house. Our eyes didn't meet. I was hidden behind my living room window, but I felt his gaze on me like a physical weight. The expression on his face was not what I had prepared for. It wasn't the incandescent rage of a wronged husband. It wasn't the broken sorrow of a man whose heart had been shattered. It was something else entirely, something far more chilling. It was a dawning, horrified understanding. It was as if he wasn't just seeing the aftermath of a cheap affair, but the explosive, terrifying solution to a different puzzle he'd been struggling with for months. His face went slack with a look of pure, unadulterated dread. He knew. Somehow, he knew more than he should. A paramedic tried to speak to him, to guide him toward his wife's ambulance. Robert didn't seem to hear. He took a slow, deliberate step away from the gurney, away from the flashing lights. He ignored his weeping wife, ignored the police officer approaching him. My blood ran cold. He wasn't walking toward the chaos. He was walking toward my front door. The last ambulance pulled away, its siren fading into a mournful wail that was slowly swallowed by the night. The flashing lights vanished, plunging our street back into an unsettling, ordinary darkness. The neighbors, their appetite for drama satisfied for the evening, began to retreat into their homes, their whispers carrying on the wind like dry leaves. All that remained of the spectacle was the faint chemical smell in the air and Leo's abandoned car, sitting empty and violated under the streetlight. My house was quiet again. Thomas was safely asleep upstairs, oblivious, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, pregnant with the consequences of what I had done. Before I could even begin to process the tangled knot of victory and horror in my chest, my doorbell rang. The chime was sharp and loud in the stillness, a sound of judgment at my door. I knew who it was. My legs felt like lead as I walked to the entrance. I opened the door, my hand trembling slightly on the knob, ready for the accusations, for the screaming, for whatever righteous fury Robert had come to unleash. He stood on my porch, his face pale and etched with an exhaustion that went far beyond the discovery of an affair. He wasn't angry, he looked terrified. "Anna," he said, his voice low and urgent. He glanced over his shoulder as if expecting to be overheard. "Can I come in for a second? We need to talk." I stepped back, letting him in. He walked past me into the living room, the same room where Leo and I had built a life of comfortable lies. He didn't sit. He paced in front of the fireplace, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "You don't understand what you've just done," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his eyes wide with a desperate fear I didn't recognize. "I understand perfectly, Robert," I said, my own voice colder than I intended. "Your wife was sleeping with my husband. I put an end to it." He shook his head, a frantic, dismissive gesture. No. You think this was about an affair? Anna, this was never just an affair." He took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rushed, panicked torrent. "I knew. I've known for months. I tried to get her to stop, but she was in too deep. He had his hooks in her." My brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Leo," he said, the name sounding like a curse on his lips. "He's in trouble. Serious trouble. He owes a lot of money to some very, very dangerous people. Gambling debts, bad investments. I don't know all the details, but he lost everything. Your savings, your retirement, all of it. They were threatening him, Anna. Threatening to hurt him, to hurt you and Thomas." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. This was a story so far removed from my reality of PTA meetings and suburban dinners that it sounded like something from a movie. Robert continued, his voice cracking. "Claire, she has a problem, a gambling problem. She got in over her head years ago, and her parents bailed her out, but they put her inheritance in a strict trust fund. She can only access it for emergencies. With proof. Leo found out about it. He manipulated her. He preyed on her weakness. Started this affair as a way to get close, to convince her that his debt was a life-or-death emergency for both of them. He needed her to lie to her family, to get a huge sum of money out of that trust fund to pay these people off." The puzzle pieces in my mind rearranged themselves into a new, far more hideous picture. The secret phone calls, the late nights. They weren't romantic trysts. They were desperate, frantic meetings. They weren't exchanging promises, they were exchanging threats and plans. The affair was a cover story, a sick, twisted piece of theater to hide something infinitely more dangerous. "Tonight," Robert said, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. Tonight was the deadline. Leo was supposed to get the first big payment from her tonight, in the park. That's why they were there. It wasn't a date, it was a transaction. A wave of nausea washed over me. The lubricant. It wasn't for passion. It was part of the charade, a prop to make the cover story believable if they were ever caught or questioned. My revenge, so meticulously planned and executed, suddenly felt like the act of a blind fool. I had been aiming a rifle at a simple target, completely unaware that I was standing on a bomb. "You stopped him," Robert whispered, the horror dawning fresh on his face. "You stopped the money from changing hands. He missed the deadline. Those people he owes, they don't just go away. They won't care that he's in a hospital. They'll come looking for their money. They'll come here." My vision tunneled. The quiet street outside, the safe haven I had fought to protect, was no longer safe. I hadn't just exposed a cheating husband. I had severed a lifeline to a pack of sharks. And now they would be circling, smelling blood in the water. My blood. My son's blood. The cold satisfaction I had felt just an hour ago was gone, replaced by a fear so profound it felt like ice in my veins. My quest for simple, righteous revenge had done more than just end my marriage. It had lit a fuse. I had thrown a rock into a hornet's nest I never knew existed, and now they were coming for me. My husband wasn't just a cheater. He was a criminal who had gambled away our entire lives. And my perfect, terrible trap had just sprung on all of us.